All right, welcome everyone to tonight's Fireside Chat for the month of July. I can't believe we're halfway through July already. Summer is going like that. Very quick. Our guest tonight is Marianna Boncek, and we're hoping that she will pop in at any moment. And when she does, I will introduce her and we'll start our chat. But until then, Melissa and I are going to chat a little bit about various things. And hopefully, if anyone has a question they would like to ask us about the program, about writing, please put it into the chat and we will be happy to answer it. Melissa, how is your term going this year, this term?
Oh, it's very exciting. We're in thesis 3 and people
Yep.
are working on their thesis manuscripts, but they're also polishing up those professional documents like cover letters and synopsis and jacket copy. And I just love reading all of those. It's so exciting. I just got to look
Yeah.
at everybody's professional website today, which is absolutely thrilling.
So do a lot of people come in with a working website already?
No, I don't think so. Probably about 20% of
Mhm.
MFA students have a working websites, and we kind of walk them through how to make one. And this term, I've got some beautiful websites. They put mine to shame.
That's great. So it occurs to me that probably a lot of the people that are in our audience tonight have not taken any of the thesis courses yet, and certainly not
Oh,
thesis three. So what should they look forward to? How can they prepare themselves to succeed in the thesis courses?
that is a great question. I think one of the things that you can do is understand that you're not just going to be working on your novel in the thesis 1, 2, and 3 series. It'd be so great of us to just give you 30 weeks to just focus on your novel. But we're also giving you instruction on how to write a cover letter, a query letter, a synopsis, book jacket copy, a pitch, a CV, a website. In short, all of those things that you must have in order to entice agents and editors to look at your novel manuscript. And if you're planning on self publishing, those are all materials that you also have to do your own publicity. And I'm so grateful that our program gives students so many tools for publishing and marketing because when I graduated with my MFA, they gave us nothing. They just let
Yeah.
us write a thesis and then threw us out into the world. And I think it was just persistence and luck that got my own thesis manuscript published.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I've said before, but when we were building this program, all of us come out of MA and MFA programs where we didn't learn any of that stuff.
No.
And so we wanted to give our students the opportunity that we didn't have. So
Yeah.
I recommend, like, if you're, thinking ahead to the thesis courses, take a look at everything that's required there, because a lot of the stuff that Melissa just mentioned, like the query letter and the cover copy and stuff like that, that's material that you'll be producing in courses prior to the thesis courses and prior to thesis three, but you'll be turning them in thesis three. Your instructor is going to be looking at them. And if there's anything that still needs polishing at that point, they'll let you know. So you still might have additional work to do on that.
I think I have more advice.
Let's hear
I
it.
think I think it's important before you hit thesis 1 to develop a writing habit, to figure out your ideal time of day or night, your favorite place to write, your favorite snacks. I really believe in chocolate as an author myself, the power of chocolate. I do think it's important to cultivate a writing habit before thesis 1 because we're asking you in thesis 1 to write and submit 2 different times chapters of between 10,000 and 15,000 words. So the sooner you can develop that writing habit, the better. And, kudos to you if you're raising kids like I was when I was writing a novel and you're writing in the car for 2 or 3 hours. while the child is in dance class. I mean, you can train yourself to write anywhere, no matter what's going on in your life. I could do a whole hour on that.
Yeah, and that's important too. It's one thing that professional writers do is they write when they can and when they
Yep.
have to, right? Because if you've got a deadline pressing, then you don't have the luxury of waiting until there's a convenient moment. You have to make those moments.
Yeah, and you have to reward yourself. Again,
Well, that's where
again
the
with the
chocolate comes in.
chocolate.
That's where the
I do
chocolate.
think,
Some of us
yeah,
like coffee as well. And
exactly.
I on occasion had chocolate covered coffee beans, I have to admit. Quite
As
good.
I have told some of my students that I used to work at a local raptor rehabilitation center, and I was one of the owl trainers. I trained the snowy owl and the barred and the great horned owl. And I explained that the owl is not going to step up onto my hand unless I give it from my pocket a dead white mouse.
Wow.
And I feel that as writers, we need to identify our dead white mouse. What is
That's
it?
that's a beautiful metaphor.
Thanks so much.
So
I
here's
think the
here's
heat's getting to me.
here's a question that I'm going to answer in just a
Yeah,
second.
I see it.
Before I do that, Mariana is actually here somewhere, and I promoted her to the role of a presenter. So Mariana, if you can hear me, you should be able to access your mic and your camera now. And while you're working on that, I'm going to answer this question
Okay.
from
I got my
Rhodey. What is a thesis project? The thesis project is what you do in the final 3 courses of the MFA, which is write a novel. And it has to be of a certain length. 50,000 words is the minimum. And yeah, you have like 3 terms to write it. And it's very difficult, I think I can safely say, but most of our MFA students manage to do it somehow. The vast majority, actually. What is your dead white mouse? That would make a great T-shirt.
I got dibs on that. Go Etsy.
Melissa, you can sell it in the store on your website.
Perfect.
It'd be a whole new revenue stream.
Fabulous. Hi, Marianna.
Hi, can you
You
hear
see-
me?
I can hear you. I can't see you yet.
I see
I
Marianna.
can see myself.
Oh, there she is. There we go. All right.
I am
Welcome.
so sorry about that. It was, I guess everything decided it had to update right now.
Yeah. Well, we both Melissa and I also had technical difficulties, so it's
Oh,
it's
okay.
going around, whatever it is.
Well, thank you for your patience. I really
No,
appreciate it.
I'm so grateful that you made it. Because Melissa and I were kind of like doing the soft shoe shuffle off to Buffalo. Um,
I'm glad you didn't have to do that for a whole hour.
so let me introduce our guest, Marianna Boncek. Marianna is an author, teacher, performance poet, researcher, and Egyptologist living in New York's Hudson Valley, which I just drove through today.
Oh,
Her 2 popular nonfiction books, Gone Missing in New York, and The Spooky Hudson Valley, are published by Schiffer Books. Her YA novel, Ajar, is published by Mélange Books. Her novel, Diamond City, is published by Atmosphere Press. Her poetry book, Still Life, is published by Wildside Press. Her poems and short stories have appeared in a variety of journals. Her poem, Bittersweet, won the 2021 Stephen DiBiase Prize for Poetry. She is also a playwright. Good grief, Marianna. And 2 of her works have been featured in the Hudson Valley Short Play Festival. Her current projects in progress include a novel, a collection of short stories, and a poetry chapbook. She reads and writes Middle Egyptian hieroglyphs. She lives with her partner, Dave, in one of New York's most famous small towns. She is available for book coaching, workshops, master classes, and speaking engagements. But if you go to school here, you get all that for free because she's an instructor.
yes, you do.
For more information, check out her website at mariannaboncheck.com.
Thank you. Wow.
And there you go. Wow, you have your hand in a lot of different pots. as
do.
a writer and creative person. So how do you manage to balance all of your various interests and projects?
Well, you know, the saying is, if you want to get something done, you ask a busy person. Because I always say that I'm like water, and I'll fill whatever space I'm given. So if you give me a year to do something, I'll take a year. But if you say this is to be done next week, it's done next week. And I also, I don't want to say I'm obsessively organized, because I'm very organized. I know how to prioritize things, and I just do it. I also say I don't clean house either, so that can help. So,
but you know, the course that I usually teach in the MFA is 505. It's the introductory course, and one of the things that we talk about there, and that students talk about in that course, is the difficulty of finding the time to write, and you know, the necessity. And in fact, Melissa was just talking about how important it is by the time you reach the thesis courses to have a writing habit in place.
oh, absolutely.
But in 505, the students are talking about, well, what are the obstacles to having a writing habit? And there's significant obstacles, right? Like you have a job, you have children, maybe you have elderly parents that you're responsible for. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff that constitutes an obstacle, and yet somehow a writer has to manage to find their way around it. So what are some of the secrets that you can share that to enable our students to get around their obstacles?
And I would say that the secret is there is no secret, right? I think, yeah, I wish. Don't we all wish? Now, this is going to sound strange, but there's something about writing that it's my, you know, they talk, I don't know if you ever heard of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. He talks about getting in a flow state. And when I write, I get in a flow state. So once I start writing, literally, I could write for hours and stand up and feel like I've written for 15 minutes. And that's why I always get dressed before I start writing, because at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I still don't want to be in my pajamas. But also, yeah, it's true. I've noticed if I go too many days without writing, I start to get a little grouchy. And I don't know whether writing induces a meditative state or whatever, or it allows me to just step out of my life and step into whoever I'm writing about, their life. But it helps ground me. So, you know, people are like, oh, I'm so busy. But if I didn't do that, I don't think I'd be able to do the other busy things I do well. I did have to learn, especially, you know, I did work a 40-hour job, hour a week job, is to grab writing when I can. So I always had a notebook in my purse and some in the doctor's office or wherever. And because I love to do long writes, you know, an hour or more, but sometimes in a busy life, you can't do that. So I have learned to grab it when I can get it. But I also, a long time ago, before writing made any money for me at all, I had said to myself, I want to be a writer, and if I wanted to be anything else, I would dedicate time to it. It's just when you're a writer, you don't go someplace else to do that. Like, you know, so I had to make a commitment that my writing time was just as important as other times. And I notice a lot of writers, when do they write? At 10 o'clock at night after all their other things are done. And so you're not giving your writing your best self. Yeah. So I made sure that I carved out time in my best self. I mean, when my kids were young, you know, I used to shut the door and say, no one knocks on the door unless there's blood. Okay. You know, because you just have to. So whether that's, you know, I think James Patterson used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, I wasn't going to get up any earlier because I was a teacher and I already was getting up at that hour. But I made sure sometimes I would actually stay after class and shut my door and lock it so no student came in wanting tutoring. And I would sit there for an hour before I went home, just so I could get an hour in. And I understand everybody's busy, but you know, it's sometimes my own students, I ask them to do a time study where they write out everything they do every single day. And start to, one, find out where they fit things. But, you know, when a student says, I want to be a writer and finish a novel, but there's no time in a week where you sat down and wrote, it's like, well, you're not really prioritizing writing a novel. It's a dream, but it's not a goal of yours. So yeah. And you know, just before people, it's true, I'm retired from teaching now. I teach here part-time, but I was a single mom, raised 2 kids, who played sports, which means I had to drive them everywhere. I tutored. So yeah, I know what it is to, you know, one of my students just recently wrote, well, I could take time away from sleep. And I don't recommend that, but I do recommend school. Like, there are some things, like I don't watch TV, you know, maybe on vacation, but because to me, that's, you know, I can squeeze that time out to write. And I don't know if that's very helpful, because like I said, there's no secret, right?
No, I think that is helpful. I mean, you know, this is something else. I'm really glad that you mentioned your best self, because I think that that's something that I talk to my students about. Because I think a lot of times beginning writers, especially, they feel a little guilty about it, you know, because they feel like, well, I'm stealing time away from those who really need me. My children need me, my husband needs me, my wife needs me, my parents need me. And what I kind of tell them is, you know, you're a writer, right? And writers write. If you're
Yep.
not writing, you're not your best
Yep.
self. And you
Yep.
can't give your best self to anybody if you're not that best self already. And to be that best self, you need to be writing. And
Yes.
then you can always be present in as that best self for everyone else in your life, and they'll appreciate it in the long term, even if they, you know, have to, like, you know, look at that closed door a little angrily from time to time. It's a trade-off.
Well, it is, but I always, maybe I'm just more selfish, I don't know, but I always felt that the best thing that I could do for my daughters was show them that I set goals and achieve them, even
Right.
if it's really hard. And
Yes.
because of that, I have watched my own daughters set goals and achieve them, particularly when they were very hard. And I remember, you know, way back in bachelor's days, trying to write those final papers, and my daughter bringing over her little chair and pretending to type on her little paper too. But, you know, I love to brag about, who doesn't love to brag about their kids? But my second daughter was born on the autism spectrum. And, you know, they basically told me that, you know, she wasn't ever going to be much in school. And this is the same daughter who has 2 master's degrees, speaks Japanese, and currently works at Princeton University. So, you know, and I told her when she was young, if you work very hard and keep your eyes on the goal, it'll happen. And it happened for her. And I'm, you know, it's not easy, particularly when you're in the middle of that novel and it's not working, and you just killed a character in chapter 4 and now you need him back in chapter 8, and your kid gets tonsillitis or whatever else they get, and it's the championship game, and your boss needs a report by 4 o'clock. I know it's not easy, but yeah, it's all about priorities.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I ask myself, will this matter in 5 years, in 10 years, in 100 years? And sometimes you say, gosh, you know, I got so worried about doing this one thing, and it really, in the long run, didn't matter.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to grab a question out of the chat, and I want to invite everyone to post questions for Marianna or for Melissa or me into the chat, and we'll be happy to answer them. So this one is referring to the introduction that I gave,
Okay.
because you have so many different books published by so many different publishers. So how do you keep track of all of that stuff? Like, how do you know I'm going to publish this? I'm going to submit this novel to this particular publisher, this novel to another publisher, this chapbook or this book of poems to this publisher. How do you keep them straight and prioritize them?
Well, each one is with a different publisher because they each are a different genre. So obviously my 2 nonfiction books, a fiction publisher wasn't interested. And actually with my nonfiction publisher, I've contracted for 3 books. So I've got to come up with a 3rd book at some point. But so I knew that they were not going to take my fiction work. And my first work of fiction was a young adult. It's more of a novella, but it is for a young adult. It's a novel length. And I had actually almost placed it with a larger publisher, but they did not like the ending. So I was having to sit down and do some revising. And just before I sat down to start the revising, a small publisher said, "We'll take it as is." And I don't know, maybe I was just tired of, and I said, okay. So they picked it up. And, then poetry actually, still has to go to another publisher that deals with poetry. I am very old school because I am very old. But I keep track of everything as I'm looking around my desk. You can't see it manually because I'm one of those kind of people that if I write it, it makes sense. So I keep all my stuff in what people would call planners. And so I keep track of all that, that way. I think the hardest thing to keep track of for me is the plays, because technically I don't publish plays, they're performed. So it's not like I have like a magazine or a book or something. I have to, I keep my CV a long list. So once my plays are performed somewhere, I add that to my CV. So does that answer that question?
No, absolutely. You have to keep up to date with this stuff.
Yes, and I'm teaching the business of writing now, and we were talking about resumes, but obviously I think writers will have more of a creative resume or a CV. So my current CV is probably about 7 pages long. That doesn't mean that that's the document I would send. So like if I'm going to go to a residency, I'm not going to send like all my jobs. I'm just going to send the artistic part of that CV to them.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to answer a couple of questions in the chat at the same time. Multitasking.
Good.
Let me ask you this question. Here's somebody who says, "Can Khan Academy help me improve my grammar?" And basically, what I'm not looking for an answer to that specific question exactly, but rather the question of grammar. How important is grammar to a writer? How much grammar do you need to know in order to be a successful writer? And how much can you just sort of say like, oh, well, the copy editor is going to deal with that later. I don't need to worry about it now. When you're working on your manuscript for submission to an agent or an editor, how much do you need to know about grammar?
Obviously I was an English teacher, so grammar is like putting on the business suit to go to the interview. If you submit a document that has bad grammar, it's going to scream, "I don't care about my writing." And it also, whether we agree with this statement or not, it's true. When somebody has bad grammar, unfortunately, we judge them as uneducated. And that's not the truth. I know a lot of very highly educated people who have trouble with grammar. So if I was to, even, first of all, I don't think my grammar is like, the highest grammar ever. I always have an editor look at anything I'm going to submit. I know that the editor at the journal or the publisher or the agent will look at that grammar, but it really says that you care and about what you're writing. It's kind of like, back in the handwriting days, the teacher made sure that it had to be neat. And we all make grammar mistakes. I still make grammar mistakes. I don't admit it that often. So here it is in recording. I have dyslexia, and I have had dyslexia, obviously since I first started. So a lot of times I will read my work and say it is perfect and then find out, oh, it is not perfect, because I tend to see what I want to see there. And that is why I always have a second set of eyes. If you have a good, grammarian friend, you can swap things. But even sometimes just swapping somebody else reading your work because it's not their work helps. So, you know, I've worked with a lot of editors and learned all my little soft spots. Grammar, and we learn to work with words as writers, but grammar is kind of like the direction. And if it's not right, your sentences might not be right, and you might not be saying what you think you're saying. And so, you know, I have a book on diagramming sentences because I actually did that as a teenager. And every once in a while, I mean, it sounds silly, but if you just spend a 10-minute lesson a few times a week on things that are sticking points, it becomes a habit. And see, and here's another awful thing I'll say. I don't believe in sloppy copies. Of course, I believe in first drafts, second drafts, 97th drafts. But I think every draft should be the best draft you can make it at the time. And when grammar becomes a habit, you don't even have to go back and look for those little mistakes. You know, nowadays they have all the checks anyway, though they aren't perfect. So I guess I'm going to, you know, I'm the old-fashioned teacher with the ruler, I guess, and say grammar is really, really important.
What do you think about that, Melissa?
Your mic,
oh,
Melissa.
You're muted.
My apologies. I got 4 cats around me. I didn't want them to bother you.
No, we want to see your cats.
Okay, they'll show up in a minute. Well, I think grammar is really important, and I got stuck just now on the next question. Is it okay to use Grammarly or Pro Writing Aid? I agree that if there's AI involved, that is not a good idea. And I have argued with the grammar function of Microsoft Word on numerous occasions.
It's garbage.
They want to rob me of my style and my tone and my creative use of the dash. Yeah. But I was recommending to, I think, Angel in the chat, get yourself a copy of The Idiot's Guide to Grammar and Style. The book is brilliant. It's quick and easy to read. You'll understand it all once you get through it.
Yeah. And to me, it's really about habit. Once you learn how to do it and you keep doing it, then you don't even have to think about it anymore. It's a habit.
Yeah, totally. I still mess up words sometimes.
God.
Yeah, none of us are perfect at this stuff. I mean, my copy editors find errors that I am like humiliated to have made, but nonetheless, thank God they find them.
Yes.
But that's, you know, an example, like the more eyes, the better that you have on a manuscript. But I think, you know, to go back to what Marianna was saying, I feel as though one of the main problems that beginning writers face, and that writers in this program face, is not knowing that the sentence you've written is not accurately saying what you want it to say and or what you think that it says. Though that's so simple, and yet it's really the heart of so many problems in writing. And grammar is the way to ensure, as best you can, that what's on the page comports with what you intended to be there, so that to the extent possible, the reader is receiving the message you want to send.
Yeah, I think that's why writing poetry is so important, because in poetry, every single word matters. And so writing poetry has really helped my other writing, because it really, you know, you have to say, am I saying exactly what I want to say?
Right. Yeah, there's no fat in poetry. It's all trimmed to the bone.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, you mentioned that writing poetry has helped your fiction writing. Melissa, do you write poetry as well?
My undergraduate degree was kind of poetry and short fiction. And so I wrote so much poetry as an undergraduate. I don't anymore, but I am so glad I took all those classes. I agree that it makes you economical. It makes you really fall in love with single words and their power. I'm such a thesaurus nerd. Probably we all are.
Do you still read poetry?
Not at the moment, unless you count song lyrics.
Yes, of course I count song lyrics.
Absolutely. I don't have time right now. I work in too many genres already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Marianna, I'm going to broach the topic, one of the topics that I've been extremely interested in hearing more about, which is hieroglyphs and Egyptology and everything. So let's get on, and the mummies. Let's get on to that.
That's what Heather just asked in the chat as well.
Oh, she did. Okay.
How did that
where the mummies
happen?
at?
So I'll tell you this. I'll tell you the story. It's true. I mean, unfortunately, all my stories are true. So years ago, I was touring the Princeton University Museum, the older museum. They have a new museum that should open this year. And they had, mummies, and the guide was reading the hieroglyphs on the side of sarcophagus. And I said, I really want to be able to do that. But of course, single mom, working, blah, blah, blah. And, it's not like you can go to the local hieroglyph school and learn how.
No.
Then COVID
I don't think
happened.
Duolingo has hieroglyphs either.
Yeah.
Could be wrong.
Well, then COVID happened, and I found that, I used to commute a couple hours a day. I had a lot more time on my hands. And the University of Manchester in Manchester, England, moved their Egyptology program online. And up to that point, there was no Egyptology program in the entire world that had an online component. So I applied and was accepted, and I spent 2 years getting a master's degree in Egyptology.
That's so cool.
I was going to go on for a doctorate. I've taken a little pause, but I still study. There's a teacher out of it's a university in the South who does private lessons, and I'm still working with her. Because if I do decide to get a doctorate, like, somebody talk me out of it quickly, please. I already have one. What do I need a second one for? I would like to write about the sky myths of ancient Egypt. And there are several tombs that they are on the ceiling of the tomb, and they've been translated, but they have not been translated with people who have backgrounds in ancient sky myths, which I do, weirdly. So yeah, but I just
well wait. So how is it that you happen to have that expertise?
Oh, okay. It's kind of like, I feel like I'm on the Oprah show now. Spill your secrets. So now let me remind everybody here, I'm an extremely intelligent person. I have too many degrees. Other people collect coins. I collect degrees. But when I was a very young child, here's another story, Paul. You're getting me telling the stories.
All right, love it.
When I looked out my bedroom window, I would see a very bright star rise at certain times of the year. So I learned at school that it was the planet Venus. Now, mind you, I was reading, so I was probably 10 years old or so. So I went to the library and I asked the librarian, I said, I want to learn about Venus. And she, instead of taking me to the astronomy section, she took me to the astrology section of the library. And so, I lived in a very small town, so I read all 3 of the astrology books. But as time went on, I have been now practicing. I don't even want to say how many years, because you'll guess how old I am. But I have been practicing astrology for over 40 years. People are like, oh, do you believe in that stuff? It's not really about a belief like in the supernatural. It's more of a study of the way people understand the sky and themselves. So I have, I've studied medieval astrology. I've studied Greek and Roman astrology. I learned Latin to study medieval texts and astrology. So when you look at the history of astrology, you're looking at the history of human belief, because the sky is something that every single culture has looked up and made up stories and believed that the gods lived there. So Egyptian astrology is one they kind of, when you look at the history of, and I call it sky myths because that's what it is. They look up at the sky and they saw myths. They kind of jump over Egypt. Like we learn about the Mesopotamians and then we kind of go straight to the Greeks and Romans. But the Egyptians had a little mix of Greek and Babylonian and then their own. And they had their own myths about what was going on in the sky. And, you don't want to say it's true, but it is that people still to this day, 2025, look up at the sky and believe that there is something in the sky that talks to us as humans. Mm-hmm. So, don't get me, I'll stop on astrology now, but there are bones that are 50,000 years old that the ancient people kept track of the phases of the moon. Now, we can't prove that they believed anything specific about the moon, but understanding how the moon changed was important to ancient people. And it's still important to us. I mean, we still say, oh, full moon, everybody's going to go crazy, right? So Anyway, that's how I have a background in sky myth.
Okay, now back to the mummies and the Egyptology.
Right. What do you want to know?
No, this is fascinating. I mean, you strike me as being like many writers, only more so. You have an extremely broad field of knowledge that you have acquainted yourself with over the years. And it seems driven by genuine interest rather than utility, right? It's not like, oh, I want to write a book about whatever, so I need to bone up on this stuff, which is obviously important if you're a writer. But instead, you're kind of like, I'm intrigued by this for its own sake. I'm going to learn about everything I can about it.
Yep.
You're a curious person.
Yeah. Yes. But that's what's always driven my education, because I don't care whether I was 17 or whether I'm now. People are like, what are you going to do with that? What are you going to like? And it's like, do I have to do something with something to know about it? Like, and what's interesting, as I study topics scholarly, because I obviously have written a lot of papers and thesis and dissertations, they actually inform my creative writing. I'm working on a chapbook now about ancient people because, when I was writing, my dissertation and I'm talking about mummies and all that, I start thinking about the people, and that inspires creative writing. A friend of mine thinks I should write a novel about ancient Egypt. And
I wish you would.
So everybody, we were actually talking about that in my class, something that interests you can really inform your creative writing because you just let your mind take it somewhere. And, so no matter, I don't care whether it's physics or, whatever, birds, you can take that information and it really can enrich your creative writing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope you do write a novel set in ancient Egypt. I would read it. I'm fascinated by that era and that mythology. Go ahead, Melissa.
Also want to hear about ghost hunting.
Oh, yes. Okay, let's move on to ghost hunting.
Okay, so I ghost hunt too. What's funny is I can't, because I do consider myself an academic, and I think I got interested because, again, every culture has ghost stories. And let's face it, I'm sure there's people right here now listening who have either felt they've seen a ghost, know somebody who's seen a ghost. So there is a phenomenon that has been happening since people have been recording happenings. And so I just happened to fall in with a bunch of friends when ghost hunting first started to come out. And we just wanted to answer the question of what is this phenomenon. And I still don't have the answer, but I know when somebody tells me they've seen a ghost, heard a ghost, whatever, that they had an experience. Doesn't mean that a ghost caused it, but what is what is happening? And I have had some pretty strange experiences myself. I can't explain, but I think for at least for me, I think that academia has passed over this subject because they just say it can't be. Well, I don't know if there are ghosts. I mean, I am a ghost hunter, and I'm going to tell you, I don't know if there are ghosts, but I know that people are having experiences. I know I've had experiences, and there has to be a reason behind them. And the only way we can find the reason is to study them. So I look at my ghost hunting as studying. Maybe the people I'm out with don't necessarily think they're studying, but I know that one of the men I used to ghost hunt, his mother had passed away, and he was just interested in do people survive, death? Is there part of us? And just people were interested in what is happening. So when we do go on a ghost hunt, if we experience something strange, we first try to explain it in a normal, natural way. Well, that could have been, or maybe it was this, but we still have experiences that I can't explain them. Now, I am not a scientist in that way, and I wish we could get more people. But it's one of those topics in academia that nobody wants to touch, because they're afraid they'll be called some sort of kook. But
Sure.
like Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia studied reincarnation for decades.
Well, I was gonna bring him up, because that's another field that is poo-pooed by academia, and I would say the same thing is true of psychic research, right? Like telekinesis or clairvoyance, all that sort of stuff. Maybe they're all related somehow. I don't know.
Who knows? I know there was a study done on alien abductions, and the conclusion, which was very scientific, was that all those people had a profound experience. They don't know if it was aliens, and they don't even know if there are aliens, but there is something like, why do people have near-death experiences? My mom had a near-death experience. So these things are really happening. We don't know why. Of course, the average person will say, well, that just proves that there's life after death. Well, it doesn't prove it, but what does it prove?
Right. But I mean, just validating an experience of a person who is used to being greeted with skepticism or outright, ridicule for having, for having experienced something that they can't explain. I think that offering that kind of, recognition and support is important, right? I mean, to me, it's all kind of circling around something writing related, which is that human beings have a need to kind of project their unanswerable questions out there into places that may sort of look back at us, right? Like the sky is out there, we're looking up at it, but it is also gazing down at us in some way. Same with life after death, right? What is it? We don't know. Like that line from Tolstoy, I always think of. I think it's the last line of Master and Man. When the character dies, Tolstoy says, what he found after death, whether it was anything like what he expected, we shall all find out soon enough.
So So I just think that there aren't any really taboo subjects. We just need to think about them differently.
Yeah. So circling back to your own writing, is this an attitude, like you're ghost hunting and your interest in astrology from like kind of a historical perspective? Is that something that finds its way into your fiction?
Absolutely, because I can do in fiction what you can't do in a scholarly article. So actually, I'm working on a novel right now about an astrologer who is working with the police, and it is loosely based on a person I know. She worked for years with she was an astrologer who worked with the Albany police. And you know, it was all confidential because you don't want the public to find out that they're using an astrologer to help.
Right.
She helped with missing people. She helped with murders. And, you know, what does that mean? She was actually, her husband was a lawyer. You know, that's how she got to start to work with the police. And so looking at it logically, we have to stick with the facts. But when you get into a novel, she can, you know,
But the police
anything
do
goes.
that in real life too, right? There's
They
been
do.
many cases where the cops are just completely flummoxed. They've run out of clues. They don't know what's going on, and out of desperation, I guess they'll bring in, a psychic or something.
Well, and I do think psychic, astrologer, whatever, as long as you don't treat them like that they're God and they know everything, they may
Right.
not even be able to bring new information, but they may be able to get you out of the way you're thinking and think about things in a different way. And that to me is the most valuable thing. Like, you know, they're not going to tell you where the body is, but they
Right.
might make you start thinking about places that you hadn't thought to look
Right.
and those kind of things. And that's what I think she did very well, is that she got them thinking in different directions.
So is the novel that you're working on going to be part of a series? Is it the start of the series featuring this recurring character?
No, I don't think so. It's she's not happy right now. I'm gonna be
Okay.
I'm about a halfway in, and I don't, you know, she's gonna stay an astrologer, but she's having a tough time.
I'm going to surface a comment from the chat, which I was quite struck by. Listening to this conversation makes me feel like writing is a coalition of every experience we have as individuals, almost like a scrap quilt. Isn't that beautiful?
Absolutely, that is gorgeous. Absolutely, you know, and that's what they mean. Write what you know, because it can't mean you can just write about your experiences, because there would never be a fantasy novel. But if you have an experience and can fictionalize it, that's what writing what you know, is all about. Like, I could write about ghost hunters and I could write about crazy ghost hunters because I've done that. And, you know, so it has that bit of authenticity.
Right. But a lot of times, don't you find also that you're writing about what you don't know, right? Because you don't know something and you want to find out about it. Like, well,
Yes.
how would people react in this particular situation? Well, I don't know. Let's write it. Let's
Yeah.
throw my characters in there and see what happens.
Yeah. And that, I forget who gave that advice, but they say when you're stuck, have two characters sit down and talk to each other.
Yeah, I have my version, the version of that I've heard. I think it was Raymond Chandler says, when you're stuck, have a character come through the window with a gun.
Ah,
Livens things, tends to liven things up for a minute.
lighten things up.
I want to once again invite any people to post the questions into the chat. We'd love to field them and answer them while we can.
I've got one.
Go ahead.
Is it okay?
Yes, of course.
As somebody who writes for children and adults, both fiction and nonfiction, articles and personal essays, I have been told on occasion to stay in my lane. Pick a lane and stick with it. And Marianna, I was wondering if anybody's ever told you the same thing and how you've responded.
Great question. Thank you.
Well, I nobody's ever told me that, thank God. They probably thought that. But when I first started writing, which was quite young, no one ever told me that writers, quote, specialize, you know? So I thought being a writer meant that I had to learn how to write everything, you know, poems and stories and essays. And so I just did. And then, you know, as I got older and started to publish, and people are like, well, I'm a poet and that's all they write. I'm like, that's all they write? Like, that's it? Like, you know, and it was like kind of shocking. But then being able to write in different genres also like helped me. So for example, I was writing a fictionalized story about Susan Smith. She was the woman about 25 years ago that drowned her children in South Carolina. And the story just wasn't working. And it just wasn't working. And I kept trying to write it. And then one day I said, it's not working because it's a play. It's not a novel. And I wrote that as a play, and it was much more successful than as a novel. And sometimes when something isn't working, you know, it's I'm writing in the wrong form. I have to write in something else. And sometimes I write things in several forms because, you know, sometimes you write a story, but it just didn't get the emotion that you want. So you write a poem or you write this, and it's nice to switch back and forth. I'm sure, Melissa, you feel the same thing, because sometimes you're done writing an essay, you know, and you want to move to something else to refresh your brain. I know when I write academic writing, I sometimes feel really stilted. So I often write academic writing and poetry at the same time.
Yeah.
The brain go back and forth, but no one's told me to stay in my lane yet. I'm sure they think it a lot, but yeah.
Well, we're certainly not going to tell you that. I promise you that. So have you ever written like a short story and decided, I mean, you're satisfied with the short story, but you think, you know what, I also want to try to turn this into a play? Or the other way around, you've written a successful play, but you think like, you know what, I think I can also make this into a short story.
I wrote a short story that was published in an anthology. It was called An American Noel, and it's about a bum who finds a baby on Christmas, at Christmas time. And he also hallucinates. Well, we don't know whether he hallucinates the angel or not.
Right.
So I had written that, and it was
He has an
published.
experience.
Yes. And so there was a play festival, and I had no idea what I wanted to write for it. And then I thought of that story, and I said, what a great visual so I kind of made my angel a little goofy, and I wrote that as a play. And it was actually performed in a local theater and on the local public broadcast station. And so it's kind of I like the play better now, but it's in two forms. It's a short story, and it's also, it's about a 45-minute play.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And I like that whole process of taking something on the page and putting it on a stage. You know, it's just, it was it was great.
Well, you know, when a play obviously is made up primarily of dialogue, right? Yeah. And I don't know what your story was initially, but I'm sure that there was more dialogue in the play than there was in the short story.
Yeah.
So you had to, I mean, that must be a really interesting exercise just in terms of thinking about setting, thinking about how you dramatize things in a way, you know, by dialogue alone.
Yeah.
That's very cool. I mean, we don't offer a playwriting, unfortunately, in this MFA, but that would be interesting. Have you ever written plays, Melissa?
Oh gosh, no. No, I don't know how to do
so
that.
Bad, I promise.
I'm terrified.
Anyway, so it looks like you had another question. Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to ask another one from the chat.
Okay.
Somebody wants to know, how many rejections did you go through, if any, to get that short story in the anthology?
That one, probably not many. It depends. So I have had a lot of success placing short stories and poems. I just think that they're easier to place because, one, there's more journals, and two, like, a journal is going to take, if it's a poetry journal, a lot of poems, you know, so it's easier to place those. And it's just, I'm careful, you know, where I send them. I send them to places where I think, you know, they would make a nice fit. But as far as rejections, there was a study done on rejections, and it said for every 100 submissions you make, you can expect 2 acceptances. So I keep track of all my submissions, and I'm a little better than that. I place about 30% of my short stories and poems. However, longer works, you know, novels, because let's face it, in today's, unless you're going with a small publisher, There are only big three publishers, you know, and they're very specific about what they want, very specific about sales. And it's harder to place a novel. It really is. It's harder to get an agent. I mean, I've gotten some of the most beautiful rejections, but, you know, there's still rejections. So to handle that, because, you know, we're all writers and we all have, you know, that person inside that's just shrinking away. Once I submit something, I try to forget it, that I've submitted it. It's in my book. I know it's out there, but I don't stress over it. I figure if they want it, they'll let me know. And I just keep working, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I've had rejections I have a lot of rejections.
Yeah, that's, you know, part of the territory, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I'm not saying you should expect rejections, but they're going to happen. You know, my mother used to have a saying, which was awful, but it's true. She said, sometimes you win, but most of the time you lose. And I would say, Mom, why would you say that? But if you think about like races and things, we can't always be the first.
Right.
But that's okay. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, because everything I send out, I learn something about sending it either to that place. You know, if I get a really nice rejection that says something like, you know, we're not taking this, but we'd like to see your next one. Well, that's great. I'll stick with them. And sometimes I do get things placed. But if you get, you know, sometimes you get an awful rejection. You know, so you learn. Then if something is rejected a lot, you can go back and say, is it being rejected for a reason? Do I need to revise? So you can take a second set of eyes and say, why isn't this page? What is wrong with this piece that it's not being accepted?
Yep. On that note, I have to bring our Wireside chat to an end. We've gone the hour. It went super fast. Well, we'll have you back, Marianna. This was a really interesting discussion. I know there's a lot more to be discussed.
Absolutely.
And I really appreciate your taking the time. Appreciate everyone for coming. And I appreciate you very much, Melissa, as well.
Yes, thank you.
And I will hope to see everyone again for the August Wireside Chat. I'll post an announcement about that soon.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. That was great.
Yeah,
Have a good night.
Have a great night.
Bye.